After traveling around the US for a few months, we are back in Canada, over in BC, and we decided it was time to patch the van up and paint it before we head up to the Yukon to start our big adventure. The paint was $65 and the easy liner was $90. We spent about $40 on other painting supplies, making our paint job just under $200 without taking the bodywork into account. So if you want to see how we painted our Sprinter van for just under $200, keep watching. The first step in our van makeover process is washing. Before we left for our trip, Will decided to put some rust sealant on the van to prevent the rust from getting worse. We have to wash off the rust sealant before we can grind away at the actual rust.
We have lacquer thinner here, and it's essentially like a really strong cleaning solution, or that's what we're using it for. The sealer we put to stop the rust from spreading worse is actually a really strong grease, but this stuff just eats through it like it's nothing. We're washing it off so we can see exactly where we're going to be grinding so we don't grind off too much. But essentially, we just wash, rinse the rag, put more lacquer thinner, and repeat.
The next step in our van makeover process is grinding away at the rust.
So rust is kind of like an annoying weed. If you don't remove it all, it'll just keep coming back. So we use this, an angle iron, to grind away at the rust until it's completely gone, nothing but smooth, shiny metal. Rust can be a little tricky to grind out, and having the right tool really makes a big difference. I've settled on these silicone carbide stripping discs, and they work pretty well for getting at the rust, but sometimes there's these little like pitting like pockets, and these like wire brush type things work really well for getting those. And then this is like a sanding disc, and it can also work well for kind of smoothing out in between the rust and the pitting. But the most effective overall I've found to be these stripping discs. We've ground down all the rust here, and as you can see, it's just bare metal. Now, some of these places, the rust has left little divots, and so our next step is going to be to put POR 15, this rust preventative coating, on these rusty spots so it doesn't leak through or it slows the process of further rusting. We don't want a year down the road or 2 years down the road for the rust to bubble up and start leaking through the paint job. We want this paint job to last and look good. Before we put on the POR 15, we went around with this Power Clean degreaser, and we made sure to make these ground spots completely grease-free so the POR 15 will stick as good as possible. We're gonna put like 3 coats of the POR 15 on, and it's gonna make a really hard, durable surface too. So it's gonna be just essentially like good clean metal once we've sanded it down and used Bondo filler on it. And so that's gonna make it so the van looks like it was fresh out the shop once we're done painting. At least that's the plan. We've got the POR 15 painted on all the spots we ground down, and so now it's time to fill those spots. When we ground the paint off, there's little bumps here, and there's also on some of the worst, more rusted spots, there's pitting from the rust, so little holes going in. And once we painted over that, if we did nothing about it, they would be pretty obvious. So we're using this Bondo brand glazing and spot putty, and what we do is we just put a little bit here, kind of like this, and use the spatula to go around, and it's filling in the holes. And we always put like a little bit extra, so it's a little bit bumped up, because we're gonna come with a sander here in a bit and sand it all smooth, so it's essentially like smooth metal, like it came from the factory. Now we're going to use some more traditional Bondo body filler. This stuff requires a hardener and it dries really fast and is kind of a pain to work with, but this stuff will do a good job at filling these actual holes. We have a hole here and then we have a dent over here, and we're going to mix this on a spatula, then apply a very liberal amount where it's quite a bit over, and then we'll kind of work on sanding it down after. But this stuff is a pain to work with, but really great for filling big dents or holes left by rust. Now we're gonna sand down all this filler. Some of the filler will come out. I don't know, we're not an expert on this, but we're just trying to get it kind of smooth so once we've painted it, it'll look nice and smooth. Also, we're going to scuff up all of the white with some 220 grit sandpaper so the paint will stick better.
So we've got the van all sanded down and we've degreased it again just to give it a nice wash, and now we're just painting up the parts of the van that we don't want to get any paint on. And the good thing about roller painting is that you don't have to tape up as much, so we're just taping the most important parts.
From reading on the forums, everyone was saying to this scenario you should splurge, go for a higher end tape. If you go for the cheap stuff, apparently it will get stuck to the van really hard and be hard to get off, or the paint will get under it. So we went for the nicest tape they had at our local hardware store.
We've got the van all taped up and we're ready to start painting.
This is mineral spirits, and we're shooting for about a 40% mix of mineral spirits to paint. So 40% mineral spirits, 60% paint. Our first coat of paint's on, but we've had some minor delays. By minor, I mean it's been like 3 days or something since we put our first coat on, and now it's only just getting dry enough to sand. I think it could have been the humidity. It's been nearly 85-90% humidity here. It could have been the thinner we used. We're gonna do some looking and figure out a better solution. But now our next step is to use a high grit sandpaper. This is 400 grit sandpaper, and we're going around and sanding down the first coat to smooth it out and also to give these little scratches in the paint so the next coat will stick better. One of the cool techniques I found was you put the roller in, you kind of soak it, then roll a few times, and you have your wet side, you soak it again, roll a few times, and then you squish the end like this, roll a few times, and you have a lot of paint in this now, and you come over here and you're letting the roller, just the weight of the roller, do the painting basically. You go up and down, and you do with run roll about a section like that, go over it a second time, and then you're going to switch to the other direction and do opposite direction. And this gives a nice, even, smooth coat without too much of orange peel. Another thing is we get these bugs that are bombing on, and we had to pick them off last time. There was literally hundreds. I think this may be a problem. Generally, it's probably best to paint outdoors where there isn't many bugs, but we don't really have an option here, so we may always have some blemishes in the paint, but it is what it is. It's another couple days later. We put on the second coat of paint just a couple days back, and then we also put on the third coat without sanding in between. If you put on the coat between like 6 to 10 hours later, another coat, you don't have to sand in between. As long as it's still wet enough, the paint will bond to the undercoat. Now, if it gets too dry where the paint won't bond, you need to sand in between, so you scuff up the surface so the paint has something to bond to. Now, we got lucky. We have a friend who has this plant down in town, the person we were painting at their house, and so we're actually able to come down here on the weekend while no one's here to do this final paint job without bugs, because the bugs were actually causing a bit of an issue. Now, when I was doing the second and third coat, I did find a technique to deal with the bugs, and that is a pair of tweezers. What you do is, as soon as a bug lands while it's still wet, you just go with the tweezers and very carefully, like brain surgery, remove that bug, and it will leave the tiniest little speck, but it's much better than when you remove the bugs afterwards. There's these little black dots and bumps all over. So today, our kind of main goal is getting it sanded down really nice, and then we're going to wipe with mineral spirits, wipe the whole van down, and then we're going to do our final coat. And this one we're going to give the most attention to detail, because this is the one everyone's going to see for the life of the paint job. We're using 400 grit sandpaper, but depending on your attention to detail, you could go all the way up to 1000 grit sandpaper, and you could sand wet and dry. But for us, we're trying to get this to look as good as we can with the time and parameters we have, so we decided to go 400, which is a nice in-between. It'll still look good, but we're not going to have it like a show car gloss finish. Our final coat of paint is on the van. It's come out looking pretty good. There was a few things we've learned throughout the process. We unfortunately didn't have the time to do like 5 or 6 coats, sanding down really well in between. And if you took the time and let it dry slowly, I think you might get a smoother result with less orange peel. From reading on the forums, people are saying that the longer it takes to dry, the smoother the result, and I think I've kind of seen that. The first coat took the longest to dry, and it also seemed to have the least orange peel. Now what we're going to move on to is painting the bottom half of the van in truck bed liner. And this stuff is really durable, and it's also kind of like stays flexible, so like if a rock comes up and hits the van, it'll kind of, reseal over it. It helps prevent rust, and it will stay looking good, hopefully for a good long time. Our first step is to sand and scuff up the area, kind of like that, so the bed liner has something to stick to. We're also going to do that to the plastic, because we're going to paint the plastic also. We're mixing in this part B. It's a resin polymer. Seems like it has some rubber, but also has a resin, which is going to help bind this together, I guess.
Moment of truth.
All right, before it completely dries, you want to remove the tape, because if you wait until it's fully dry, it might chip off some of the new bed liner. So it's been about an hour since we painted. We put 2 rows of tape, which was a really good idea. Thanks, Krista. And
Why?
Because if we hadn't put 2 rows of tape, we would have gotten all of the bed liner all over our fresh paint job. But moment of truth. Looks pretty good.
Damn. The van's all done, and here she is. We have a little bit of detail work to do. We've got to spray paint this black. We're going to spray paint this up. We're going to paint up our mirrors, but essentially We're basically done, and this is our first view with our brand new painted van. Now that our van is all painted up, we are ready to head on and start our big adventure. We are heading up to dip our wheels in the Arctic Ocean before spinning around and heading down to the most southern tip of South America. We know this is going to be a big adventure of a lifetime, and this is why we're going to be sharing the entire journey with you right here on my channel. Make sure to subscribe and hit the like button to join us on this epic journey.